Last week, Pastor Jared asked you guys about your dreams when you were growing up. And when I was growing up, I remember the little boys wanted to be firemen. Anybody? Firemen? See, the response, somebody. Come on. Shout out fireman. Come on. Policeman? Teacher? Teacher? Let me see, what else? Pro football player? Huh. I clearly remembered I wanted to be an architect. That's not your most popular thing to grow up, but I clearly remembered my teacher. My teacher taught us about this guy named Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright, arguably the greatest American architect of all time, arguably. And I've always had an admiration for the guys pushing the limits of their industry, you know, always flirting with the edge, pushing for the boundaries for breakthrough. This was the guy, he was the GOAT. He was the GOAT. What does a GOAT mean? Greatest of all time. I went to the football player, and he didn't know what the GOAT was. He was the GOAT. He was the GOAT. I'm talking about over 1,000 different designs in his lifetime. Go ahead and count that up. That's a lot in a lifetime. You're not good with numbers. No. 1,000's a lot, right? Okay, that's a lot. 1,000 different, but not only designed them, he saw over 500 of them come into fruition. He saw, including his most famous piece, my favorite piece, was a house built on top of a waterfall. It was built right on top of a waterfall, and I'm telling you, the water looks like it's coming straight out of the walls, and he's blending nature and structure seamlessly in something he called organic architecture. Organic architecture. This was my dream. Frank Lloyd Wright, no, it's legit. Today, tours, hundreds of thousands of people pass through this house on an annual basis. And I realized that I passed up that house on my drive across the country. Just while I was looking into this, I was like, wait, I thought it was in Chicago. It was in Philadelphia. But Frank Lloyd Wright, he had a studio in Chicago. So when I was 12 years old, I decided that I was going to go to the University of Chicago and become an architect just like Frank Lloyd Wright. You remember that? You remember that? I was telling mom and dad about it. This is my brother, by the way. That's why I'm asking. I remember telling my family about it. My dad didn't even know what an architect was, but he was excited I chose something. And I get it. You guys don't get too excited sometimes about the dreams when you're younger because it changes as your interests change, right? So by the time I was in high school, I fell in love with computers and technology. This guy, I know, this cool factor right here. You guys can't add that up. But the same way I looked at Frank Lloyd Wright, the same way I looked that way, I looked at Bill Gates and Michael Dell and Steve Jobs. These were the tech giants at the time. So I also love that. And my friend Billy and I, he's in the room today. Billy and I, in high school, we decided that after high school, we would move to the center of Silicon Valley and take the tech industry by storm. That's what we were going to do. We decided to do that. Now, last week, Pastor Jared showed you guys some young pictures of himself. Yeah, you guys remember? It was cool to see how he illustrated his dream of becoming a rock star. I brought a picture for you today. Now, before we put it up, I need to warn you guys about a couple of things. I need to prepare you guys. Now, I was a lot older than Pastor Jared during this time. I was about to graduate high school at that time. So my coolness factor was a lot higher than what he had. You know, remember that bowl cut he had? My coolness factor, well, you're talking about trendiness and fashion. I was at the top of my game, baby. Just want you to brace yourself before you see this picture. Go ahead and put that up. That right there is 125 pounds of pure promise, baby. I had the perfect look. I had the perfect look for the tech industry, right? That's the perfect look. I remember Billy telling me, he describes me today. He would describe me today often. He would talk about, I had the epitome look back then as it was the epitome look of the nerd. Of the nerd. Y'all laughing, just like they did back then. But I'll tell you what, I knew my dreams, I knew my ambition, and I was gonna have the last laugh. You know what I'm saying? I was gonna have the last laugh. So after high school, Billy and I, we packed up our stuff, drove down to San Jose, and within the first year, we ended up getting jobs. We ended up working at eBay right after they went public. So we were there back in '98. I know I'm giving away my age a little bit, and we were working with B. She's like, I wasn't even born. Back in that, and things were going well, but then I caught myself in the first year. Within the first year, I started slacking off. Things got a little hard, and I found myself quitting. I started bringing back F's and incompletes, which was a very rare thing for me. So I tried to shake it off, and in my sophomore year, the same thing. I tried to buck up and really, well, it was really still my freshman year because I tried to do it. Somebody caught that. That was a little late, though. I try to really regain my focus, but at the end of that, I messed up and end up failing and incompletes again. I decided to take a little bit of time off of school, maybe a semester off. You guys ever heard that from someone? Ended up taking a semester off and just focus on work to recoup myself. And not only the bad grades were coming, I ended up getting into some trouble with the law. And so the tail between my legs, nothing to show for, just a bunch of shame. I moved back to Sacramento. All the hopes and dreams that I had leaving high school, all the hopes and dreams, all of a sudden it was just a cloud of shame. But I had more grit than that, so I re-enrolled. I said, I'm going to do this again. I re-enrolled to Sac State over here, and within the next 2 years, it was the same story. It was the same story. I was completely done with school then. I remember during that time, my eldest brother had come to me and said, maybe school isn't for you. How about you come and start this business with me? And my eyes lit up. My eyes lit up, and this is a new adventure. This is a new promise, new dreams, and something to get excited about again. And this is it. If my eyes were set on Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they weren't just programmers, they were entrepreneurs. And if I thought school was hard, I was in for a rude awakening for business. Because my first business, whether it was the high-end salon that I was a part of that got difficult and I quit, or it was the marketing company that we were so excited about and we started doing all this designing and then it got difficult and I quit. It was the marketing company, the contracting business, network marketing, real estate and land, just whatever I touched, I end up quitting. And I remember I got to a point where I was just completely done with everything. I tried to avoid every single person. I remember sleeping in my room until 3 or 4 in the afternoon every single day just to avoid any type of conversations with people. I remember I was completely sad, hopeless, and depressed. For months and months, I was in my room. And whether it was the years that I spent in college and the business after business, or even the relationships that I had entered, every single relationship, everything I touched was one failure after the next. Everything was just one act of quitting after another. But I'm thankful that God isn't like me. He's not like me. He doesn't quit on me when things get hard. God isn't someone who would quit on the dreams for my life. So in Revelations 3:20, there's a really awesome promise that he has for you. It says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him, and he with me. That's a good promise to know that wherever you are in your life, no matter what age, no matter how many times you squandered your dreams, no matter how many times you've let people down, that God is always knocking, and there's always a God dream for your life. There's always a God dream for your life. And I get it, the map of life is difficult, it's confusing, and even when you have a glowing line, a glowing arrow leading your directions at complicated junctions, at complicated parts, sometimes you make the wrong turn. Sometimes not only you make the wrong turn, you find yourself off road. But the beautiful thing about God is it doesn't matter how many wrong turns you've made. It doesn't matter how far off road you've got. God will always be recalculating your direction all the time, every single time. He is not out of ideas for your life. So you might be saying, you don't understand, Pastor Q. I've tried everything. I've done everything. Everything I've touched was a failure. Everything I've done has squandered it away. Don't I have to get realistic? Don't I have to just look myself in the mirror and just say, let's get practical. Let's get practical. All of the challenges, I'm not too good. I'm not good enough for that. Maybe I just sit in my comfort. Maybe I just get to a point where I let all of my past experience determine what my future is going to be. And I could tell, I was there. Some of you guys can't even look at those dreams right now. Some of you guys have decided that that's way too difficult. Those dreams are way too difficult. But the lack of destiny in your life is never on God's hand. His destiny for you is bigger. It's bigger than anything you can ask or imagine. The thing that he has for your life, the God dream that he has for your life is way bigger than that. What practicality might look like, though, practicality might look like is you stop doing this by yourself. The practicality might look like you partnering with God in your purpose. That's practicality. And maybe by then you might have the courage to pick up those dreams again. But just because there's always a constant stream of dreams coming your way, a constant stream of seeds coming your way, doesn't mean you're in a place, your posture is in a place to receive them. So what we have to do is we have to evaluate the position of our hearts. Because God always has a word for you. God is always knocking. God always has his God dream for you. But is the soil of your heart, is the posture of your heart ready to receive them? So Jesus, in this parable, talks about 4 different types of soils, 4 different types of position and postures of where you might be today. And you might find yourself relating to 1 or 2 different types of soil depending on the day and depending on the mood. So in the first type of soil, in verse 4, it says, and the sower, as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. The wayside is like the asphalt or the sidewalk. You try to plant seed on the sidewalk, it's not going to grow much. Some of you come through the door with your wall so high, God doesn't have a chance. But let's say the word is good enough. Let's say it does seep through, maybe in the cracks of the sidewalk, that it might grow a little bit. It's left there for the birds to devour. I remember when Billy invited me to church, and I was clowning on him so bad. I was like, you are so duped right now about this thing. But it's all good if it makes you a better person. Hey. I remember we were arguing and debating about creation versus evolution and all of these fun stuff. But at the end of the day, he drove me home, and in the front yard of my house, he prays for me, and he gives me this book called The Case for Christ. Anybody heard of that book? They finally produced a movie out of that earlier this year, but The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, and I had promised him I was going to read it. I was like, okay, you're going to give me a book. I'll give it a shot. So the seed was good. I picked up that book and I could not let it down. I was reading through the first chapter, the second chapter, third chapter, and before I knew it, I was like, grab the bookmark. Actually, I didn't fold the page, more like folded the page and tucked it away, because what I tell people is the word, it was getting too real. The seed was good, but I was a sidewalk. I was the wayside. And no matter how good it was, it never had a chance to grow any type of fruit. And maybe that's who you are today. Maybe that's where you are on certain days of the week, on certain times somebody finally, they trick you into coming to church. Hey, we teach them that. That's called strategy. The Bible says compel them. With free lunch, with donuts, with... You get yourself here, but the walls are too thick. That even when the word is so good, I've heard some of you guys leave this place and I say, I can't believe that God would speak to me personally, but you shake that off. You leave and you just shake that off. You squander the word for your life. The second type of soil starts in verse 5. It says, some of the seed fell on stony places where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up because they had no depth of earth. Let me describe to you what type of soil that is, who that person might be. And if I can be honest with you, we celebrate that often. That's the person that in a moment, in an emotional state, they shoot up their hand and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's a Christ that loves me that much, a Savior that loves me that much. In a moment, they raise their hand and they get so excited about this, but they choose not to steward that. They leave here just saying, hey, that was good enough for me. That's all I needed. That was that hoorah, and maybe I'll come back next week and get that jolt again and I'll be good. But what happens to that person that they don't invest in the depthness of the soil? What happens to that person is Jesus talks about the tribulation and the persecution, the trials and the persecution. I know when we talk about the word persecution, there isn't much that happens here. We think about the Muslim countries and all of the stories that we hear over there, but the persecution here, it's so sad to know that the persecution might just look like a friend of yours looking at you funny when you tell them about Jesus. And then you wither away. It's your family that all of a sudden just like wondering or asking you something you don't know about. Oh, I must not know about everything, and then you wither away. Because the Bible says right here in verse 6, it says, when the sun was up, they were scorched. And because they had no root, they withered away. We don't have the opportunity. We can't risk not going deeper. We can't risk that because the slightest amount of persecution will wither us away. We can't risk that. We need depth. And the third type of soil, some of the seed fell on thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. And Jesus would later on talk about the thorns as the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches. The cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches. How relevant is this? Thousands of years ago, and most of us sit in this type of soil. Did you know that if you had a home to go home to and food in your fridge, you are the top 5% of riches? Top 5% of wealth in the world. The cares of the world is all of a sudden the likes that you need to have on Instagram. The cares of the world is all of the things you're ashamed to talk about, the faith. I'm telling you, this type of soil knows the goodness of Christ. This type of soil knows about what he can do, the power that he's seen. This type of soil understands all of that, but then there's a level of shame, and they need a reputation. They have a reputation they have to protect. They have to protect. And the soil, we live in it. We talk about this deceitfulness of riches. People don't like talking about this because we start talking about money and then everything kind of shuts off a little bit. But I want to tell you right now that money is tricky. Even when some people say, no. I'm going to be the king in the marketplace so I can give back to the church. I can give back to God's kingdom. I can do that, but money works like this. One day you own it, another day it owns you. You got to protect it now. You got to protect it. Not only that, now with this type of wealth, there's a certain level of stature that you have to protect also. There's a way that you have to stand, the clothes that you have to wear now all of a sudden, the car that you have to drive all of a sudden. You got to protect the level of wealth that you have. Money is tricky. There's this guy named Charles Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon, great preacher. He's a great preacher in the 1800s, probably the greatest preacher of the 1800s. And he talks about this rich man that confides in him. There's this rich man that goes up to him and just shares his heart and says, sometimes I wish I wasn't so well off because I clearly see how much it hinders my relationship with Christ. Sometimes I wish it. Because as you're preaching this stuff, it's so good, and I clearly see how distant I have to be to protect what I have. This is what Spurgeon says to him. I would never wish that God takes away the financial blessings in your life. I would never wish that he would take away the relationships and the family members and the friends that you have to the point that you would hit rock bottom. I would never wish that on your life. So I would never wish that on your life. But if God does take it away, if he does take everything you valued away, if he took every bit, every dollar, every friendship, everything away to the point where you're just crawling on the floor and the only name you could scream out to is Jesus, and you gain salvation through that, that would be the greatest bargain in your life. That would be the greatest bargain in your life. I tell people all the time, the greatest decision of your life is to make Jesus your Lord. And the last type of soil, it says, but others, the other seed, fell on good ground. Good ground. Somebody say good ground. That's what we want to be. We want to be the good ground. I pray all the time I'm the good ground. But I got to search my own heart. The good ground. How do we know we're the good ground? How do we know that we're the good soil? What do I do? How do I prove that I have good soil? So we'll just go to the word. It says right here, it says some of them fell on good ground and they yielded a crop. If we believe that God is always sowing a seed, and we know the seed is good, if your ground is good, you have to be yielding fruit. You gotta be producing fruit. And whether this is fruits of the Spirit, whether we're talking about love, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, is this coming out of your life? Maybe it's disciples. Maybe eventually you pour this back out into people, start seeing life change in the people you're investing into. That's the fruit. You can tell by the fruit if you're the good ground. I want to be the good ground. But sometimes, what if you catch yourself being the first soil or the second soil? What if while you're going through this and you start looking and searching your heart and you're just that first soil that cannot receive the word from God? Well, you got to work your ground. You got to work it. You got to till it. You got to till it. It's dry. It's hard, but you got to till it. I got a bed of soil here. And I got a tool. I got a plow. When Lisa and I, we moved into our house, when Lisa and I first moved into our house, the yard was a mess. Anybody got to visit my house and saw how, dang. I didn't even know some of you guys came. You guys just creeping up or something. But my yard was a mess. There were so many different trees and shrubs and rose bushes, and we cleared it all out. It was a big old square plot of dirt. By the time it was done, it was a complete mess. But the plan was to put in a new lawn. The plan was to put in a new lawn. So what you have to do, the process you have to do is you have to till it. You have to till it. Now I'm using a hoe right here, but to till the land. Y'all playing. To till the yard, we use one of those rotary ones, you know, that you push that it kind of spins around and it's like you kind of till the land like that. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? So what we were doing is we were trying to till the yard. We're trying to till the yard, and you can imagine we're pushing this. And I got to be honest with you, it wasn't me pushing it, but I got to be honest with you. However, I'm going to tell it like it was me to make the story better, okay? So here I was working really, really hard. Tilling the yard with this rotary thing. It was gas powered. It was a big boy. It was gas powered, but after a few hours, we noticed that we had no progress. The ground was too hard. The ground was too dry. We did not see any progress, but we kept on going at it until eventually God says, sometimes a hoe just won't work. So it just can't break up the dirt. So, so we went ahead and decided to rent an excavator, a big boy. We rented an excavator. We hopped up in that thing. Again, I wasn't driving, but I'm going to pretend it was me. We hopped in that bad boy, and we started just going through the yard, and I'm telling you, within less than an hour, that whole thing came up. Every piece of root from unwanted trees, everything from from the shrubs and the bushes and the weed, everything came up, and it was just piles and piles of all of this stuff within less than an hour. It was all tilled and ready. Aren't you thankful that no matter how hard, how dry your soil is, how dry your ground is, and no matter how much root you've let grow deep into your soil, that no matter how long you've left it growing out of control, that God has a tool big enough, that God has the excavator big enough to pull all that junk out. Oh, he does. Through the blood of Christ, he definitely has that. But I can tell you right now that after we were done, it actually looked worse than when we started. It actually looked worse. I'm talking about piles and piles of this root, piles and piles of all of these things sitting now in the yard. It looked a lot better when it was buried underneath. Can I tell you right now that once you decided to start preparing your soil, that you're going to unearth some things that doesn't look so pretty. You're going to pull up some stuff that you didn't want to see. But I'm telling you right now, when you get that up and out of there, now you're making room. Now you're making progress for new life. For new life. We're not done. We're not done. We couldn't put in the grass yet. What we had to do next was we had to buy yards of soil. Because this dirt didn't have enough nutrients. We had to buy external soil to put in, and then we spread it all around. We spread it all around. And that's why sometimes, if there's not enough life inside your heart, not enough life now in the soil that you've left alone for so long, that's when you need a community. That's when you need other people to pour in the nutrients for you. It's necessary. And the last thing we did, and I want to see if you guys can guess this. We started digging these trenches around the perimeter. Started digging, and we started putting in pipes for a watering system. Don't get new life and have no way to feed it. We needed the watering system. And here's the thing, we were now ready. The ground was good. The ground was good, ready for fruit, ready to grow, to yield crop. And we started rolling out the sod, and this brown thing that was so ugly for so long looked like this fresh new lawn of grass. But at that moment, they told us that we had to oversaturate the lawn for weeks to make sure that it would take root. If you didn't water it, it was dead in a week. It was dead in a week. Can we get to our feet today? The ground was finally good and ready, and it produced, it yielded a crop 100-fold and 60 and 30. Can I tell you that you are responsible for the soil? That's your responsibility. If it's hard and dry right now, break it up. You are responsible for your soil, for the posture of your heart to receive the dreams that God has for you. You are responsible for that. But the beautiful thing is, when you look at a tree and the seed, everything in the seed, everything that's needed to create that tree is already in the seed. That's the hard part. When God sows these dreams into your life, everything to make it come into fruition is already in it. It's already in that place. And some of you guys right now, the soil of your heart has no room. It's filled with all the root of the unwanted things. It's filled with all the weed. It's filled with all of... And today you guys need to make space. You guys need to pull that junk out and make space for the seed who is Jesus Christ.